Okay, so let me ask you something. If your reputation was taking hit after hit, if the press was constantly against you, the public was turning cold, and everything you did seemed to backfire, what would you do? You'd probably try to find somewhere fresh. Somewhere the crowd doesn't know the full story yet. Somewhere the cameras are still kind, and that is exactly what some people are saying Harry and Meghan are doing with this Australia tour announcement. Welcome back to Regal, Revelations. I'm so glad you're here today because this story has got everyone talking. We've got royal watchers, PR experts, Australian media personalities, and everyday people all reacting to this announcement. And the reactions? They are not all what you'd expect. So stay with me because we are going to go through everything. The what, the why, the reactions from all sides. And the one big question everyone keeps asking. Is this a genuine goodwill visit? Or is this a very carefully calculated PR move? Let's get into it. Right. So, first things first. What exactly was announced? Because I think before we start talking about reactions, we need to be very clear on what we actually know. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Harry and Meghan, are reportedly planning a visit to Australia. Now, the details are still a bit thin at this point, and that's actually part of the conversation which we'll get to. But what's been reported is that this is being positioned as a tour with a purpose. There are mentions of causes they champion: mental health advocacy, the Invictus Games legacy, and charitable work aligned with their Archie Foundation. Now, Australia is not a random choice here. Harry has a long history with Australia. His time there during his gap year, his military connections, and of course the Invictus Games being held in Sydney back in 2018, that was a genuinely massive moment. Thousands of people lining the EDDU streets, standing ovations, Meghan by his side just weeks after their wedding. It was the kind of royal tour that reminded people why they fell in love with the idea of Harry in the first place. So when Australia gets announced as a destination, there's already a layer of nostalgia baked in. And I don't think that's an accident. But here's where it gets interesting. The timing of this announcement has raised eyebrows. We're at a moment where the Sussex brand, and yes, I'm calling it a brand because that's essentially what it's become, is under real pressure. The Netflix deals, the Spotify deal that ended, the memoir Spare, the ongoing legal battles in the UK, the reported tensions with the royal family, all of it has created a media environment that is, to put it gently, not very forgiving toward them right now. So you announce a tour to Australia, a place where the public memory of them is largely warm, and suddenly the conversation shifts. Instead of talking about what went wrong, people start talking about what might go right. That is PR 101, and a lot of people have noticed it. Now let's talk reactions. And I've been through a lot of them. Social media, news outlets, royal commentators, Australian voices specifically, and I want to give you a fair picture here because this is genuinely divided. The supportive reactions, there are people who are genuinely excited, particularly in Australia. There's a warmth there for Harry that goes back years. People remember 2018. They remember Meghan's energy on that tour. She was radiant. She was engaged. She seemed genuinely happy to be there. And for many Australians, that's still the dominant memory. Some supporters are saying, look, these two do real work. The Invictus Games continues to grow and change lives. Harry's work with veterans is not a performance. It comes from a real place of personal experience and pain. Meghan's advocacy around women's rights, mental health, and racial equality resonates with a huge number of people. A visit to Australia could do genuine good. There are also people who are tired of the negativity. They feel like Harry and Meghan can't win. that no matter what they do, it gets twisted into something sinister. And, honestly, that's a fair point to at least acknowledge. The level of scrutiny they receive is extraordinary. Some of the coverage has been deeply unfair at times. So yes, there are people who see this announcement and feel hope. The skeptical reactions. Then there are the skeptics, and they are loud right now. A lot of the skeptical reaction is centered on the timing and the framing. Critics are pointing out that this announcement comes at a very convenient moment. When things get difficult in the US or UK media landscape, the Sussexes tend to pivot to territories where they might get a warmer reception. Canada before their exit. New York for the UN. Now Australia. One royal commentator, and I've seen this echoed in a few places, put it quite bluntly. They said this feels less like a genuine philanthropic visit and more like a press reset. Choose a location where the history is good, where the cameras will smile, capture some positive headlines, and let those images do the work of repairing a reputation that's been taking damage. There are also questions being asked about the detail, or lack of it. What exactly are they doing there? Who is hosting them? Are they doing this independently, or is there some official connection? What charities are specifically involved? The announcement felt, to some, more like a headline grab than a substantive plan. And when the details are thin, people fill in the gaps with their own interpretations. Social media has been particularly sharp on this. Comments across platforms, and I'm not going to name names, but trust me, the royal community online is very vocal, are calling it everything from a desperation tour to trying to recapture the magic of 2018. That last one is interesting because it speaks to something deeper, the sense that they are chasing a version of themselves that no longer quite exists. The Australian media reaction. Now let's zoom into Australia specifically, because I think this is the most nuanced part of the whole thing. Australia is not a simple audience. It's a country with a complex relationship with the monarchy and the royal family more broadly. There are Republicans who would very much like Australia to become a fully independent republic. There are Royalists who still feel a strong connection. And then there's a huge middle ground. People who quite like the idea of royalty but are also watching this particular chapter of the Sussex story with a mixture of sympathy, interest, and skepticism. Some Australian outlets have been fairly warm in their initial coverage. The nostalgia angle is real. 2018 really was something special. But even in Australia, there are voices asking questions. Is this about Australia, or is this about them? Are they coming to give, or are they coming to receive? Specifically, to receive the goodwill and positive press they haven't been getting. Elsewhere? There's also a practical Australian bluntness that I find quite refreshing in coverage from that part of the world. Some commentators have essentially said, look, we like Harry, we remember Meghan fondly, but we're not naive. If this is a PR exercise dressed up as a charitable mission, we'll figure that out pretty quickly. Australians don't tend to be easily charmed for long. Okay, so let's tackle the big question head-on. Is this a PR strategy? And I want to be careful here because I think there are a few different layers to this. Layer 1. Is every public appearance, by any public figure at least partially, a PR strategy? Yes. Absolutely yes. Any politician, celebrity, or member of a royal family who appears in public is managing a public image. That's not cynical. That's just reality. So if we're asking, is there a PR element to this? The answer is, obviously, yes. That's true of everything they do. Layer 2. Is there something more calculated about this particular announcement? This is where it gets genuinely interesting. Think about the pattern. After leaving the royal family, Harry and Meghan very publicly built a new life in California. They did the Oprah interview. They did the Netflix documentary. Harry wrote Spare. Each of these was a major media moment that also, in some way, kept the wounds of their departure fresh and visible. Now the climate has shifted. The Oprah interview is years old. Spare has done its damage and also taken its toll. The Netflix show came and went. The Spotify deal is gone. And the general sense, even from people who were sympathetic, is that perhaps Harry and Meghan have said everything there is to say about the royal family, and it's time to move forward and build something positive. A tour to Australia fits that narrative perfectly. It's forward-looking. It's connected to something universally respected. The Invictus Games. It puts them in a setting where Harry especially is genuinely beloved. It generates warm images. It gives their foundation and their advocacy a concrete, visible platform. And here's the thing. Even if all of that is true, even if this is partly or largely a strategic move to generate positive coverage, does that make it wrong? This is the question I keep coming back to. If a politician visits flood victims because they genuinely care, and because it helps their approval ratings, is the caring less real because there's also a political benefit? Most of us would say no. We'd say both things can be true at once. So maybe the more useful question isn't, is this PR, but rather, will any real good come of it? Will veterans be supported? Will mental health conversations happen? Will communities in Australia feel seen and engaged? If yes, then even a strategically motivated visit can produce genuine outcomes. But the critics would say, and this is a valid point, that the problem is when the strategy overrides the substance. When the announcement is designed to generate headlines, but the follow-through is thin. When the cameras capture beautiful moments that don't translate into sustained, meaningful action. That pattern, not just for the Sussexes, but for many celebrity-driven advocacy efforts, is a fair thing to watch out for. I want to take a step back here and think about this from a different angle. Because I think to really understand this tour announcement and why it's generating the reaction it is, you have to understand where Harry and Meghan are right now. Not just in the press, but in terms of their actual lives and goals. They left the royal family in 2020. That's over 4 years ago now. In that time, they've built a life in Montecito. They have 2 children, Archie and Lilibet, who are growing up out of the royal spotlight. They have a foundation. They have media, deals. They have a public platform. But here's what I genuinely believe they are also grappling with. Purpose. Not financial purpose, they seem to be managing that, but legacy purpose. The question of what this chapter of their life actually means. The question of whether leaving the royal family was the right call, not in terms of their mental health or their family. I think Harry especially has been clear about those reasons, but in terms of impact. In terms of actually changing things, because here's the uncomfortable truth. Inside the institution, Harry and Meghan had access to something incredibly powerful, the global platform of the British royal family. It's one of the most effective soft power tools on the planet. People who wouldn't pay attention to any other charity event will watch if there's a royal connection. Organizations benefit enormously from that association. Outside the institution, they have to work much harder to create that impact. The Netflix deal helps. The foundation work is real. But there's a ceiling to what independent celebrities, even very famous ones, can achieve compared to working royals. So when they announce a tour, part of what they're doing is trying to reclaim that feeling of royal-scale impact without the royal structure. They're trying to show, to themselves and to the world, that they can still mobilize communities, still make waves, still matter. And you know what? That's actually kind of human. That's not cynical or manipulative. That's two people who gave up an enormous amount and are now trying to prove, constantly, that it was worth it. The pressure of that must be immense, but it's also why every move they make gets read through this lens of, is this real or is this performative? Because the stakes feel very high, not just publicly but personally. Let's come back to the geography because I don't think it's random and I don't think it's been fully explored in most of the coverage I've seen. Australia is interesting for several reasons. First, as I mentioned, Harry's genuine history there. But second, and this is significant, Australia is a Commonwealth country that has had a real, ongoing national conversation about its relationship with the monarchy. The Republic debate in Australia is not a fringe thing. It's a mainstream, political and cultural conversation. Now, Harry and Meghan are not working royals. They are not representatives of the Crown. So visiting Australia doesn't carry the same weight or complications it would for, say, King Charles or Prince William. But they still carry the royal name. They still generate royal-level interest. And in a country where many people have complex feelings about the institution they left, that's actually an interesting position to be in. They can connect with people who love the royal family through nostalgia and warmth. And they can also connect with people who are more Republican-minded through the narrative of having chosen freedom over institution. It's a rare position that lets them speak to a very wide audience. Now, I'm not saying this is some genius calculated positioning. It might just be that Australia is a place they love and feel welcomed. But the optics work out very conveniently. And in the world of public image management, convenient optics rarely happen by accident. There's also the Invictus Games angle. Harry's commitment to that cause is widely respected, even by people who have very little patience for other aspects of the Sussex media presence. Invictus is real. The veterans it supports are real. The emotional moments of those games are genuinely moving. Anything connected to Invictus gets Harry a lot of credit. And if the Australia tour has even a partial Invictus element, it puts the whole thing on firmer moral ground. Zoom out with me for a second, because this tour announcement is one moment, but it sits inside a much bigger story about what the Sussex brand is and where it's trying to go. In the early days after leaving, the narrative was very much about breaking free, telling their story. Exposing what they felt was unfair treatment. And a large part of their audience, those who followed them closely and loyally, were very engaged with that narrative. But narratives have a shelf life. The escaping the institution story can only sustain so long before people start asking, okay, but what are you building? What comes next? What is this actually for? And I think what we're seeing now is an attempt to answer that question. The answer being, we are advocates, we are humanitarians, we use our platform for good. We are not defined by what we left, but by what we're building. The Australia tour fits squarely into that messaging. It's positive, it's forward-facing, it's tied to causes rather than grievances. It's the visual language of a couple who have moved on and are doing something with their freedom. Whether that story lands, whether people believe it, whether it sticks, depends entirely on execution, on whether the details fill in, on whether the work on the ground is substantive, on whether there are veterans who are better supported, communities that are genuinely engaged, conversations that actually happen. Because here's the thing about PR, it can create attention and opportunity, but it can't create credibility. Credibility comes from sustained, consistent action over time. And that's ultimately what both their supporters and their critics are watching for. All right, you've been watching this long, and I owe you my actual honest opinion. Not just a summary of what other people think. What do I think? I think the truth, as it almost always is is somewhere in the messy middle. I don't believe Harry and Meghan are purely cynical operators who don't care about the causes they attach their names to. Harry's relationship with veterans and mental health advocacy is, in my view, genuinely personal and genuine in its motivation. Meghan's track record on girls' education and racial equity stretches back before she was ever a royal. These aren't people who stumbled into advocacy. They came to it from real experiences. And I also don't think you can look at the timing, the destination, the framing of this announcement and conclude there's no PR calculation involved. Of course there is. They have advisors, they have communications teams, they make strategic decisions about when and where and how they appear publicly. That's not a scandal. That's just how public life works at their level. What I think the real question is, and what I'd encourage you to watch when this tour actually happens, is whether the substance matches the spectacle. Are there real outcomes, real partnerships, real conversations, or is it a beautiful few weeks of photographs that fades without a trace? That's the test, not the announcement, the follow-through, and honestly, I hope it goes well. Not because I'm a Sussex superfan, regular viewers know I try to be balanced on this channel, but because I genuinely believe that when famous people use their platform meaningfully, good things can happen. Awareness gets raised. Resources get directed. Conversations start. I want that for Australia. I want that for veterans. I want that for whatever communities they connect with on this tour. But I'm watching, and I suspect you are too. All right, that's our deep dive on Meghan Markle's Australia visit and all the reactions swirling around this announcement. We covered the what, the why, the reactions from supporters and skeptics, the Australian media angle, the PR question, the bigger brand picture, and my honest take. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think? Genuine goodwill visit or calculated press strategy? Or, and this is the option I personally lean toward, both at the same time? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one, and I genuinely love hearing different perspectives on these stories. If you found this video useful or interesting, a like really does help this channel grow. It tells YouTube that this content is worth showing to more people, and honestly, it just means a lot. And if you're not subscribed to Regal Revelations yet, what are you waiting for? We cover the royal world like nobody else, with depth, balance, and genuine curiosity. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves.